am so excited. We have with us today Christopher Lind, who is an executive advisor of business transformation at Christopher Lind Co. He's a seasoned executive and former chief learning officer at ChenMed, industry analyst and advisor at LinkedIn Top Voiced, and host and author of Future Focused. He also is a devoted husband and father of eight.
That's
Christopher,
right.
welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to chatting.
Well, I first stumbled upon your work on Substack, which listeners a great follow here, about AI and some of the misperceptions about good
Yeah.
old artificial intelligence that's just dominating the news cycle and all the things right now. I'm curious, like, what are some of the common misperceptions that you see with AI right now?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones, and a lot of people just, it's understandable why it's hard to keep a pulse on it because one, it's changing super fast, and there is billions of dollars behind it, that is really propping up an entire industry that largely is still kind of a hammer looking for a nail.
Yeah.
There's we're finding things and it's coming together, but like all big transformations, it takes time and it's never quite what you expect. And so, you have a lot of folks who have been sold on this idea that AI is the solution to all of your problems. Like you do AI and magically everything works. And I think one of the problems is just societally, and people in general are just not really good at this. We operate off assumptions a ton. We see
Mhm.
something from across the street and we go, yeah, I know what that is. And it's like, do you though? Because you're not near it. You had never had a conversation with, you've never really been in it. And as a result of that, it's really easy to look at what AI does and
Mhm.
think it's super capable. But it's interesting when you talk to people, they always think it's super capable of doing what everybody else does, but never what they do. And so when you actually step back and think about that for a second, you start to see the pattern of wait a minute, if it's
Yeah.
great at everything but the thing that I do, then isn't that true of everybody that it's not actually as great at everything as we think it is? And that's where I spend a lot of time digging into the research and really trying to help people understand it is an enabler. So,
Mhm.
in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing, who's very intentional and thoughtful and surgical and skilled, it, yeah, it's great. It's not going to quadruple your output. It's not going to make you, exponentially better than you were before, but it will improve things. In the hands of an amateur or someone who is being reckless, that amplification effect still applies. And so I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things that many people are finding with the labor market is there's this idea that we just turn on AI and profit. And actually you may be going full steam ahead right off a cliff. And many people don't see it until they don't realize it. Now there's a whole lot of complexity. I have a whole series right now called Fortifying Organizational Fragility. That's a 3-part series because of the fact that in many ways this has a compounding effect. So there's that. I think another one though that I spend a lot of time talking about is nothing is free. And that's one of the things that people don't realize about AI is whether you're talking about financial costs or whether you're even
Mhm.
just talking about your capacity costs, you still have the same 24 hours in a day. You still have the same amount of focus. You still have, might you use it differently with AI? Yes, but it doesn't magically create something from nothing. And a lot of people are operating as though it does. And it's very dangerous. And that's I like to say people are playing around with like depleted uranium as though it's kiddie sand. And I'm like, what are you doing?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so organizations, to your point, are investing a lot in their own AI technologies. Obviously,
Yep.
these big AI companies are a big source of the growth in the stock market, but highly leveraged, not profitable. And one of the points I think you make a really good point on in your series is that Senior executives have a big disconnect between the rest
Yes.
of the workers in the organization. Senior executives are like, everyone's using AI and it's saving like 10, 15, 20 hours a week of people's productivity. And you're like, not so much. So,
No.
Christopher, why this disconnect?
Um, the one of the gaps that I keep talking about that continues to grow that is extremely concerning is the gap between responsibility and accountability. It's massive. It's bigger than I've ever seen it in my career, where you can be at the top and essentially be not accountable for anything. You don't really have to know what's going on under you. You don't have to give answers for it. You can just literally make up a story as your answer, it's not even based in truth. And it's just like, how is that acceptable? And so you see that in organizations where you have senior executives who are very far disconnected from the work. Going back to my analogy of looking at things across the street, some of these folks are looking at it through a pair of binoculars, miles down the road, going, from what I can tell, I think AI can take care of that. And you're like, what? You can't even see it clearly. It's a blur over there. And when the people are saying, hey, it doesn't work, there's this refusal to say, well, I actually don't know because I'm just looking at it through binoculars. So if
Mhm.
you're telling me it doesn't work, it's not that I, as a senior executive, need to go get in the weeds anymore. It's just I actually need to listen to you as somebody who's doing the work. So if you're telling me that it's not doing it, I need to actually listen to you, go, okay, well, then what is a more realistic? What is a more, and
Mhm.
that requires humility, which senior leaders are not always known for as their leading factor. But I think the other challenge, and this is why I talk to the frontline folks or folks in the trenches just as much, as there's also a lot of pressure to pretend like you are seeing all these benefits. There's a lot of keep up with the, yeah, you're saving 20 hours a week, right? I mean, that I just did last week, and you're like, what? You're creating more of the problem. Like, you're fueling this idea that AI can do things that it can't. And
Mhm.
so I think it is this balancing act. If I talk to senior leaders about, hey, you need to listen and have the humility to actually trust your people and have more realistic expectations. But to the folks on the other side, you need to set realistic expectations and have those hard conversations. I had a conversation just this week with the senior leader, and they said, I just talked to somebody today. They said it's AI has saved them 20 hours just in a week. And I said, I just want you to think about that for 1 second. If you have an employee that literally saved 20 hours this week with AI, that should lead you to go, what were you doing with your time
Right.
that 20 hours just vaporized? And not to put them in the hot seat and accuse them, but maybe you need to look at what you have people doing, because if you're having them do the kind of work that AI can magically take off their plate, maybe you have them doing the wrong kind of work. And you just almost saw this look of,
I
oh,
just
you know
saw
what?
20 more hours. I didn't think about what I was
Right.
doing.
I just was so excited about the increased efficiency. I didn't really think about all of that. And I think that's where it's a compound problem. And we're quick to try and point fingers at, well, who's to blame? And it's like, well,
Mhm.
we all kind of are collectively contributing to the state we're in right now.
Yeah. And also there's this idea, I know I hear this a lot in organizations, that AI is going to replace all this talent, right? That we're going to be able to outsource so much of our current workload to AI. And to your point, that's not what's happening in reality. The labor shortages that we're forecasting with baby boomers' retirement rates and the younger generation does not have the numbers to replace. We've known this for
Nope.
decades, but we keep persisting and pretending it's not a problem. And maybe that's it, Christopher. People don't want to face the
Yes.
the reality that in a few years' time we're not going to have enough people to do the jobs, and AI just simply cannot replace all of that human capital leaving the workforce.
Right. Well, and I think, when you really think about some of these things, it comes back to some of the core problems that the two that I'll hit on. One you just touched on, which is we like to go to things that seem like easy answers. well, the real problem's complicated and hard to figure out. It's just easier for me to say AI is going to fix this. And if I can just hope that, then I can just kind of not pay attention to the complexity of the mess. And that's a natural human tendency. We tend to not like to deal with hard things.
Mhm.
But I think the other thing that's a real factor is, I mean, there's no denying that greed and power is very much a driving factor in this.
Mhm.
And if the workforce realized these companies need you, they need you.
You have
They
power.
need your intelligence. They need your labor. They are freaking out about the fact that AI cannot fix this problem for them. And as they're waking up to it, there is a fear of, well, but that means we might have to actually pay a reasonable wage. We might have to actually take care. And the longer we can keep people believing you're
Hmm.
useless, you're worthless, you know what? You better just take pennies on the dollar because otherwise we'll hand your work over to an agent. The longer that myth holds up, the longer people can be exploited for what they have to offer. And so there's a lot of effort going into making sure people don't realize you are valuable. You are valuable. What you do matters. And you do have more agency than a lot of these things would like you to believe. And so I
Yeah.
think there's some real powerful forces going into this because I mean I'm in some of these conversations. I'm like, people are
They just
freaking
don't,
out about the future that's coming.
you don't want them to know, right? Like that
No.
power shift, that dynamic is, yeah, you don't want to hand over that power. And I know you've got a bunch of young kids that you're having conversations with, and I spend a lot of time with young people at university with my own kids that are just like, what? Like work is like, what? It's just,
Yeah.
I think we see it coming, and it's not, I think, Christopher, too, it's a long game. It's a long-term problem, and we like to solve
Yes.
short-term problems. But yeah, the forecasts I'm seeing with the labor shortages start to really hit hard in like 2030.
Yep.
Also, Gen Z is going to be a huge part of our workforce then, and baby boomers will be a relatively small part of our workforce then. And so that huge demographic shift that we're going to see too, and not just race, not just sexual orientation, neurodivergence, disability. I mean, there's just so many from a diversity and inclusion perspective that I'm worried these organizations that pivoted hard to avoid, some of this authoritarian regime is really going to be hitting. It's going to hit them hard in a few years. But for now, you can kind of take advantage and exploit the labor force, like you said, and like take advantage of people's complacency and unwillingness to see this. I'm
Yeah.
curious for organizations that maybe you do see looking ahead, planning ahead, thinking about talent pipelines, thinking about succession planning, thinking proactively about these labor shortages, and maybe they're not, covering their earmuffs
Yep.
on the
Yep.
AI isn't going to replace
Yeah.
everyone. What are some things that organizations can do or are doing to prepare?
I think some of the things that it's so much of this stuff is like it's not new, right? It's really not new. Like recognizing that really the world operates on people. Like your
Mhm.
customers are people, which means your employees are people, which means the company runs on people. And so if you actually care and value people recognize that. They know that. People know as much as you think you can like fool them into believing you care when you don't. They know. And so even right now, companies feel like they're really like, yeah, we've got these folks. It's like you've only got them because they feel right now like they've got nowhere else to go. The loyalty, the article I wrote this week was called the Age of Mercenary Talent, where, you know, yeah, it seems fine to just pay people the bare minimum and harvest them for what you can get out of them until you realize you're the Titanic and you hit the iceberg and they have no incentive to do it. They're just
Mhm.
like, whatever, like I'm out of here. See you later.
I love that
Um,
analogy though with the Titanic. I read that. It's like, if you watched the movie or studied history, like the
right.
people fought ahead, right, were the ones that survived, And
Exactly.
it's a long game. And
It is.
it's interesting, Christopher. I teach a lot of leadership classes, and we have all these academic theories and evidence-based approaches. It honestly comes down to, I don't know how many times I say this in class, like care about people.
Yes.
Just like you said. And I know that sounds super basic, listeners,
It
but
does sound super simple, but it's like it's true.
people feel it. They
Yes.
feel like a visceral, like you can't fake that. And demonstrating that you care about the people you work with is a profoundly interesting competitive advantage right now, which sounds
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Well, and right now I understand it feels like a liability. It feels like a
Mhm.
liability right now because it feels like, well, but that's not what's incentivized. And, the short-term gains you can get all come from, exploiting people for what you can get out of them and cozying up to, whoever appears to be in power in the short-term moment. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, right. But you don't have to look very far to see how short-term of a strategy that is. And when it comes collapsing down, which it does, whether you look at the trajectory of history or even our current moment, it takes you out really big. And
Mhm.
so I mean, a lot of the work I do, I'm like, what are you doing to build trust right now? Like
Mhm.
now is a really good time to make trust an actual business metric in your organization.
Mhm.
Because if you have a high trust score, you are infinitely more resilient. And no, are you going to maybe miss out on some of the, predictive market gains as you gamble on what's going to like, yeah, but study what happens to long-term gamblers. They always go
Yeah.
broke. Why? Because
Yeah.
eventually it
Like instead of
collapses.
the up and down, you're more, yeah. Hmm.
Yes. And so it's one of those, that is one of the biggest things. I'm like, what are you doing to build trust? Like, doesn't mean you don't have to make hard decisions. Doesn't mean sometimes things don't go according to plan,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
do the right thing by the people, be as transparent as you can. Don't bamboozle and swindle people and tell them a story when it's not really what's going on. If you can't tell them something, tell them, I can't tell you right now, but here's when I can, and here's what we're going to do. And those simple things, which is like leadership 101, it might feel like it's not
Well,
going to sustain you, but it will.
yeah, my concern is we're just seeing the opposite of leadership 101 in
Well,
many
right.
many parts of our country and corporate America, and it seems to be working for now, to your point. I
Right.
was asked a question in class that I thought was really interesting, tied to what you just said, is one of my students said, "So does fear motivate people?" It's like, yes, in the short term, it
Mm-hmm.
does, but not in the long term. Our nervous system can't stay in that fight or
Yep.
flight mode forever. So short term, days, months, I mean, we're kind of seeing more months than I'd like to see, but there becomes a breaking point where people won't
Yep.
tolerate it anymore. And I'm wondering, Christopher, what you're seeing as far as like what I'm seeing, and I'd love to, if you have data to validate this or observations to validate this, is I asked my students, it's into the semester right now, and we're wrapping up, and asked them to kind of think about their future and their legacy. And I had a student, early 20s, say, by the time I'm 30, I want to have three different revenue streams. Yeah, I want to have a job, but I also want to be able to monetize my expertise and my other talents. And it's like, what? Like, that was not something that would fly out of my mouth in my early 20s. Like, no, you're going to get a job and like get a paycheck and work your way up the corporate ladder. Like, that is not the way these young people are thinking. And rightfully so, because it's a reaction to this fear-based, low trust environment that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's one of the things that I actually think there's a lot more behind it than people realize. And that's why when I talk to younger folks in general, I'm like, don't buy this lie because you're actually sawing the branch off that would be there to support you when you get out there. Because even that kind of mindset of like, I'm going to spin up three revenue streams, I'm going to do, and I see this with vibe coding apps all the time. Like, oh, everybody
Yeah.
can vibe code now, so I can build whatever I think's brilliant, and then I'll sell it for this and I'll make whatever. And I'm like, but you won't. And what you're sacrificing in the
Hmm.
long term is you haven't really built any durable expertise or skills because you've just been whiz banging around at everything and you've not really gained any sort of expertise or capability in anything. And now you're kind of up a creek. And a good example of this is I know this was kind of a pop trend. And I know a lot of these folks who are really struggling now. YouTube was like the thing. You're going to be a YouTuber. Like all these young people, they started their YouTube channels, they were Minecraft, toilet paper forts, all this stuff. And it was just, we just make stupid videos and we will profit
Well, I'm going to be an
forever.
influencer.
Right. Going to
Yeah.
be an influencer. And you see a lot of these folks now getting into their 30s, and Google's changed the way ad revenue works on YouTube now. And they don't really have any marketable skills because you're like, well, what did you do? Well, I brainstormed stupid ideas. But their teams are actually the ones who are being successful because the teams that did all the builds, behind the scenes, the teams that did all of the actual video editing work, the ones that actually honed a craft, they're fine. They're the ones that are going off going, well, I'm actually a highly skilled video editor and I have a whole portfolio of skills, or I'm a highly designed architect because I was able to do all that.
Yeah.
They're fine.
I
The
can
folks who
create
were like, wait,
content.
I'm the
Yeah.
face of YouTube, a YouTube channel. And people were like, okay, well, we don't need that. Like last I checked, we don't need a chief toilet paper fort officer. So that, and they really are struggling to go, what do I, and now they're in their 30s starting at square one. And that's just one example of things where I get the hype to kind of
Hmm.
like fake it till you make it. But
Yeah.
if you're not
And,
building
and and
towards
I think
anything,
one of the points you make in some of your articles too is like the lack of apprenticeship, right? We have all
yes,
these folks walking out the door that aren't mentoring or spending time with junior talent. And then you have this gap of lack of transferable
huge gap.
skills for young folks that can't quite connect the dots to current jobs. And so, obviously skilled trades we've been talking about for years are an opportunity for folks, but what can we do to like close this gap?
Yeah. And so this is where one of the biggest leadership problems we've had for a long time is actually having jet fuel poured all over it. Um, because you talk to a lot of people who are in leadership roles. When you ask them, what's the worst part of your job? They'll say, dealing with people. And you're like, what? Like,
That's your job.
that is the core part of your job, or that's why you should get into it. And I remember doing work with one organization years ago, and one of the most successful things we did was we created a individual contributor and a management track that ran in
Mhm.
parallel. So if you didn't
Mhm.
like people, that's fine. There was still career development, but people managers loved people. They were coaches, they were developers of talent, all this stuff. And so we now have this real problem on our hand because we've incentivized all these people to move into leadership roles who they,
Mhm.
one, don't really have the skills to explain to the people that work for them why they do what they do. They can't really coach. They can boss people around, but they can't go, well, why don't you tell me, what do you think, and let's talk through your logic, or
Yeah.
what questions do you have? They don't have the patience for it. Their
Mhm.
kind of mindset is, I'm just getting out what I can till I'm out of here. And so for organizations, I talk a lot about, like, you need to find who are those seasoned developers of talent, and you
Yeah.
need to be investing in this because it's not just the trades. Like, this is true of a whole new
Mhm.
generation of people coming into corporate America, that it's like, you don't really learn strategy in college. You kind of do, but it's not till you really get in and you
Yeah.
work under a mentor or somebody who goes, yeah, I know that that makes sense on paper, but here's kind of some of the challenges you have. And you go, oh, you know what? Wow. Like, that's really helpful. Marketing, like any sort of industry, you need that person who can show
Yeah.
you the ropes.
Context.
Yeah.
That's what I see missing in the classroom. They don't have context to connect these concepts to. And so, to your point, I teach a lot of leadership and talent management courses, and the two modules I get the most positive feedback on are feedback and coaching.
Yep.
And these are skills that these are folks that are, in exec ed programs that have been in corporate America that are boomeranging back. And they said that is something I took so much away is how to give constructive feedback and receive constructive feedback and recognition, as well as coaching skills to help
Yep.
someone kind of self-discover their path forward and be curious and not judgmental, which we're not seeing like demonstrated or modeled
No.
by senior leaders. And so we have to kind of like teach it. But I struggle with then they're not able to really practice it until they go into that environment. And so there's just like, I think there's a huge opportunity for skill development on the job. And
Massive.
if we just think about AI, so we're not saving 20 hours a week, right? But maybe we're saving 4 hours a month. What if that 4 hours a month got replaced with some quality learning and development or some
Well, and I
people
think
development skills?
that's, something you hit on that I want to hit on is that one, AI has no context. And that's probably one of the biggest
Right.
assumptions people miss. It's like it's intelligent in that it recognizes patterns, but it doesn't know what those patterns mean. And so ultimately it's a fool. Like it's a complete fool. It's like mathematically this makes sense. And you're like, well, no, it
Yeah, as
doesn't.
right, it hallucinates. Yeah.
Right, right. But this point of I am a big advocate that speed and efficiency are the worst measures of AI effectiveness. And that is not a popular opinion, but I'm telling you right now, if all it's doing is making you faster at doing the same things you were doing before, you are fundamentally failing with AI because it should be freeing up your time to be focusing on either creating a better product. So if you're
Hmm.
working with AI, you should be using it to refine and make a better product with what you're doing, or you should be repurposing that time to something that's a better use of your time. Like you said, with either developing your own skills, coaching the people that are around you, like all these other things. And that's not what we're doing. It's just like we just keep hitting the speed dial on the treadmill and it's
More,
like
more, more.
great, you can run 15 miles an hour and send more trash off the back of the treadmill. Like what is that doing for your
If,
organization?
if my email box with AI spam messages is any indicator, like that's
Right.
not helpful.
Right. Is
Yes.
your news feeds just flooded with social media posts from
Yeah.
your like, is this even a person that's doing this or
Well,
is this just
yeah.
like a chat bot?
Well, it emphasizes back to quality over quantity. I know that's a conundrum
Right.
I'm wrestling with right now because AI has helped me speed up my content generation because I have so much content that it can help me reframe and bring in case studies and all sorts of things that would take me forever to do on my own, even though it's my original content, it's hard for me to like go back in the archives and
Yep.
find it. But just because I can produce more, should I be producing more? Or should I really work on like a high quality piece of content and do more or do less, but more of a deeper dive? And so, yeah, it's just on my
Well, and
mind.
it's
And
really interesting with that because one of the things that we aren't acknowledging that we're missing with AI is AI has not increased our capacity. And
Mhm.
so even in terms of like the flood of like people still only have so much attention. They still have only so much emotional capability to handle things. And so it's like, well, okay, so now you scream at them 1,000 times versus 10 really important times. Well, now
Right.
they've just tuned out so much noise, they aren't paying attention to anything. And the 10 times you need to say, like, hey, they're like, yeah, hey, what?
If
Like,
anyone has kiddos, you know that that does not work. That
right.
strategy.
Yeah. If you're the parent that just screams at your kids about everything, pretty soon they're just like,
Whatever.
whatever. Yeah.
Same goes for humans at work.
Yep.
Christopher, well, obviously you have a plethora of content I know on your website and your Substack. I highly recommend you follow Christopher Lind on Substack. But tell our listeners, like, is there one message or one thing we haven't talked about in this conversation that you would hope folks would like want to be cognizant of or be thinking about in the age of AI?
One of the lessons I reinforce with my kids, literally, I say it every single night and I make them repeat it back to me. And, they kind of always roll like, yeah, dad, we know. And I'm like, no, you will remember this lesson. I'm like, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. It always is. And that lesson will not change
Hmm.
because of AI. It will not change
No.
because of the economy. It will not change because you got a certain job title. Like there is nothing that if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And just because somebody tells you, no, it's not, like I figured it out,
Okay.
then let them walk that path and let them take all the other lemmings that walk that path. The number of classes I see where it's like, here's how to accomplish this thing. And then you look and you're like, that person's job is selling the class
Yeah.
on that thing. Like they aren't even an
Self-serving.
expert. They're an expert on selling you that they have the answer to that thing. And so it's something that I tell my kids a lot. And I think that's something that's really helpful, which is why it's so important to get to know people with different
Mhm.
perspectives and who come from
Mhm.
different backgrounds and see the world differently than you, because otherwise you become more blind to this. Well, what is sounds too good to be true? Well, you actually have to have a diverse perspective to see that. Otherwise, you
Mhm.
are extremely vulnerable. And at a
Yeah.
time where,
And AI does that, right? It feeds us what it
oh,
thinks we want to know.
oh, the
Like
data behind
confirmation,
it's, yeah, so
confirmation bias, like it's
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 huge.
riddled.
And so I think that goes back to why we need each other. We need each other
Hmm.
more than anything,
Yeah.
regardless. So,
I was raised by a strong single mom, and she would very much say things like that, Christopher, that, hey, if something good happens, be careful and like think about it. It's like, Mom, you're being pessimistic, but to your point, I mean, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And this is one thing I've been emphasizing with my students and with my clients is in the age of AI, critical thinking skills are way more important. Like AI cannot critically think. We can critically think and decipher real information, helpful information, different perspectives. And that is something that's going to be so much more important in the future of work. And
yeah,
unfortunately, a skill that hasn't been cultivated as much as it
no.
should.
No, and I think the biggest myth with AI that I continue to see, people are worried. They're terrified, like, oh, it's going to become conscious. It's going to be able to, be sentient and all this other stuff. And I'm like, I actually think the bigger risk is we believe that's true. I
Yeah.
think that is actually a much bigger risk because once we believe that's true, we start treating and thinking about it differently. And the reality is, no matter what
Hmm.
AI becomes, it's still an alien
It's not a
intelligence. It does
human.
not see, think, and view the world like we do. So whatever it becomes, it
Hmm.
it doesn't see things through a
Well,
human lens. It
you can
doesn't.
see that through the use case with mental health. Like it's not a replacement for a suicide hotline. Like
No.
that is always going to be better to talk to a human versus talk to AI about serious mental health challenges. So
Yes. Yes.
yeah, believing it'll replace us can lead to that though.
I actually think that is probably one of our greatest risks is we
Mhm.
overestimate what it will become. And
Yeah, I know. I think about like Star Wars and these future movies where they treat them like humans. Like, oh no, be
mm,
careful.
I know,
Christopher,
I
it's
know.
been a blast talking with
This has been
you.
super fun.
Tell our listeners how can they follow and support your work?
Yeah, so so I put content out in a lot of different places. So usually I do direct people to my website, which is christopherlin.co, because you can get to all of my stuff, whether it's my podcast or my Substack or my YouTube or LinkedIn. So that's usually the best way to do it. And then also I do the work I do because I just genuinely want to see people thrive in this era. And so when I tell people like grab a virtual coffee with me, like I love just saying like, hey, look, if there's a way I can help, great. And I
Right.
think in an era where there's this tendency to want to posture and peacock and pretend you've got it figured out,
Yeah.
we need to be able to sit down with people and go, I'm struggling, like I'm lost. Like,
That's how we
can you
started our
help? Do you
conversation
have
today, which I
anything?
appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, be
So
real.
be real. Yeah. Authenticity, in an age that says that's a vulnerability, it's a superpower.
Yeah, it's going to make a comeback, and I appreciate
It
you
is.
you staying with the long game. Here's to more folks staying with the long game.
Well, let's ignite that and re-inspire it because we're gonna need it. And I have hope and I'm encouraged as the more I talk to younger people, the more people in some ways are getting pressed to their limits.
Hmm.
In some ways, the hidden blessing is eventually people crack and they
Yeah.
go, okay, enough is enough. And
Yep.
they
We
finally
can do
come back
better.
from it. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for your work and your time
Thank
today.
you for having me.